My name is Sarah, and I'm 48 years old. For the last 20 years, I've been a mother, a wife, and, in the eyes of my younger sister, Chloe, a complete and utter failure. It's a label I've worn with a quiet, weary sort of acceptance, a cloak of invisibility I'd pull on at every family gathering. But standing there, under the soft glow of fairy lights woven through the ancient oaks at my son Leo's wedding, that cloak was about to be ripped from my shoulders and set ablaze in front of 200 people. The smoke from that fire would either suffocate me or finally reveal the person I'd kept hidden for 2 decades. You see, a wedding is supposed to be a celebration of new beginnings, of love and of family. But as I watched my sister, resplendent in a designer dress that cost more than my first car, take the microphone for a toast, I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine. I knew, with the certainty of 1,000 past cuts, that she wasn't there to celebrate my son. She was there to perform. And her favorite stage has always been the one built upon my supposed inadequacies. What I didn't know was that the words she was about to say would trigger a chain of events so catastrophic, so precisely aimed, that it would not only shatter her perfectly curated world but also expose a secret I had guarded more fiercely than a dragon guards its gold. A secret that was, at that very moment, the invisible pillar holding up the lavish life she so proudly flaunted. This isn't just a story about a family argument. This is a story about the devastating power of underestimation and the spectacular, life-altering consequences that unfold when a quiet woman finally decides she's had enough. Before you hear the words that changed everything, the words that set karma on a collision course with my sister's life, you need to understand the landscape of our family. It was a battlefield of comparisons, and I had long ago surrendered. When I was 28, I was a rising star at one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law firms. I was an associate on the fast track to partner, billing 80 hours a week, fueled by coffee and a relentless ambition that had been drilled into me since childhood. I was sharp, I was successful, and I was deeply, profoundly miserable. The day I found out I was pregnant with Leo, something inside me shifted. I looked at the endless stacks of legal briefs, the sterile glass walls of my office overlooking the city, and I saw a future that felt like a gilded cage. So I made a choice. I walked away. I traded my partnership track for the playground track. I swapped depositions for diapers and hostile takeovers for taking over carpool duty. My husband, David, a history professor at the local university, supported me completely. His salary was modest but steady, and together, we built a life that was rich in everything but money. It was a life filled with laughter, with home-cooked meals, with scraped knees and bedtime stories. It was, for me, the very definition of success. For my sister, Chloe, it was the definition of failure. Chloe's ambition never wavered. While I was nesting, she was networking. She married Mark, a brash, aggressive real estate developer with a portfolio as large as his ego. Her life became a meticulously curated Instagram feed of European vacations, charity galas, and front-row seats at Fashion Week. She lived in a sprawling mansion in the suburbs, drove a white Range Rover, and considered anything less than a 4-star restaurant to be a personal insult. And through it all, she treated my life with a kind of pitying condescension that was far more painful than outright mockery. At Christmas, she'd hand me a gift bag from a high-end boutique and say, "I thought you could use something nice, Sarah. It must be so hard for you to treat yourself." When I talk about a breakthrough I'd had with Leo's reading struggles, she'd listen with a vacant smile before launching into a story about the 5-figure donation she'd just made to the art museum. She never asked about my life with genuine interest. She only used it as a dull, gray backdrop against which her own vibrant success could shine even brighter. I was the before picture in the advertisement for her life, and I let her. For Leo's sake, for the sake of a fragile family peace, I absorbed the slights, swallowed the backhanded compliments, and smiled through the casual dismissals. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my family, my love, my quiet joy. But every condescending remark was a small crack in a dam. And on the day of my son's wedding, that dam was about to burst with the force of a 20-year flood. As Chloe's perfectly glossed lips curled into a smile and she raised her champagne flute, I knew the storm was finally here. If you've ever felt underestimated or unappreciated by the people who are supposed to love you the most, then you know the kind of slow-burning fire I'm talking about. Hit that like and subscribe button, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of how this story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to bite your tongue at a family event, trust me, what's coming next might just give you the validation you've been waiting for. To truly grasp the depth of the wound Chloe inflicted, you have to understand that her dismissiveness wasn't just about my choice to be a stay-at-home mom. It was a systematic dismantling of my identity. A story she told so often that even I sometimes started to believe it. She erased the woman I was before the Sarah who graduated top of her class at Northwestern Law. The Sarah who argued and won a landmark case against a chemical company before she was 27. In Chloe's narrative, that woman never existed. I was simply the sister who couldn't handle the pressure, who gave up. She conveniently forgot the nights I'd spent tutoring her through her own college business classes, patiently explaining concepts she couldn't grasp. She forgot the time I'd used my legal expertise, for free, to help her navigate a messy contract dispute with her first employer, saving her thousands of dollars. In her mind, my past achievements were irrelevant, because they didn't translate into the currency she valued, visible, material wealth. My currency was different. It was the trust in my son's eyes, the comfort of a stable and loving home, the freedom to read a book on a Tuesday afternoon without having to justify my time to anyone. But in a world that often measures a woman's worth by her job title and her income, my quiet life was easily reframed as a lack of ambition. The irony, the secret that simmered beneath the surface of it all, was that my ambition hadn't vanished. It had merely transformed. After Leo started elementary school, the intellectual restlessness that had driven me in my law career began to stir again. The silence of the house during the day became a canvas. I started small, offering pro bono consulting to local nonprofits, helping them streamline their operations and manage their legal compliance. I found that I loved the puzzle of it, diagnosing a problem within an organization and architecting a solution. I missed the intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of a complex problem solved. It was a way to keep my mind sharp without sacrificing the flexibility my family needed. David was my biggest champion. He saw the light come back into my eyes and encouraged me to do more. "Your brain is a gift, Sarah," he'd say. "Don't let it gather dust just because you're not in a skyscraper anymore." End of 2. So I took on a few paying clients, small businesses that needed strategic advice but couldn't afford a massive consulting firm. I worked from the small office I'd set up in our spare bedroom, scheduling my calls and meetings around school pickups and soccer practice. I never talked about it with my family. Why would I? To Chloe, a few small-time clients would have just been another hobby. Like my book club or my garden, another quaint domestic pastime to be patted on the head and dismissed. It was easier to let them believe I was just a mom. There was a certain freedom in their low expectations. No one was watching, no one was judging. And so, in the quiet shadows of my sister's dazzling spotlight, I began to build. I founded a consulting firm under a discreet, unassuming name, Ariadne Strategies. The name was a private joke, a nod to the Greek myth of the woman who helped a hero navigate an impossible labyrinth. That's what I did. I guided companies through their most complex challenges. I operated with complete anonymity, building a reputation through word of mouth in very exclusive circles. My clients weren't small businesses anymore. They were C-suite executives, hedge fund managers, and tech founders who valued my sharp legal mind and my ability to see the big picture. They didn't know my name was Sarah. They knew me only by my professional pseudonym, a name I'd chosen to keep my two worlds entirely separate. Athena. Athena was everything Sarah wasn't supposed to be. She was a powerhouse. She was decisive, strategic, and commanded fees that would make my sister's head spin. But at home, I was still just Sarah, the woman who made pancakes on Saturday mornings and drove a 10-year-old Volvo because it was safe and reliable. The financial rewards from my business were substantial, but David and I made a conscious decision not to change our lifestyle. We invested the money quietly, paid off our mortgage, and set up a substantial college fund for Leo. We didn't need the validation of a bigger house or a flashier car. Our wealth was a secret garden, a source of security and peace, not a tool for social climbing. And all the while, Chloe continued to send me articles about finding your purpose after the kids leave home, and suggested I take up a pottery class to keep myself busy. The condescension was so deeply ingrained, so automatic, that it was almost comical. She had no idea that the jobless failure she pitied was the same sought-after strategist that CEOs were trying to get on the phone. And she certainly had no idea that her own husband, Mark, and his teetering real estate empire were about to become my firm's newest and most problematic client. This convergence of my two worlds was a ticking time bomb, and my son's wedding was about to light the fuse. The wedding ceremony was perfect. It was held in a botanical garden, and as Leo and his beautiful bride, Maya, said their vows under an archway of white roses and eucalyptus, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I watched my son, the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, now a man making the most important promise of his life, and my heart felt like it would burst with a love so fierce it was almost painful. David squeezed my hand, his own eyes misty. This was it. This was the success that mattered. This was the wealth no bank could ever hold. Even Chloe, for a brief moment, seemed moved, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, careful not to smudge her professionally applied makeup. But the moment the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," the truce was over. Chloe's focus immediately shifted from the happy couple to her own performance as the glamorous, influential aunt. During the cocktail hour, she held court near the champagne fountain, her voice carrying across the lawn. She wasn't talking about Leo and Maya. She was talking about her recent trip to Tuscany, the bidding war over her latest real estate listing in Lincoln Park, and the utter nightmare of finding a reliable contractor for her new pool house. She introduced her husband, Mark, to anyone who would listen, not as her husband, but as Mark, the visionary behind the Vantage Holdings Group. Mark, for his part, played the role of the mogul perfectly. He was loud, overly familiar, and dispensed unsolicited financial advice like it was candy. He clapped David on the back a little too hard and said, "Still shaping young minds, Professor? Good for you. Me, I'm shaping the skyline." David just smiled his quiet, academic smile and said, "Someone has to teach them the history of the men who built the first skylines." The subtlety was lost on Mark, who just laughed and moved on to his next audience. I tried to avoid them, mingling with Maya's family and catching up with old friends, but Chloe was a heat-seeking missile for an audience. She cornered me by the string quartet, looping her arm through mine. "Sarah, darling, you look comfortable," she said, her eyes doing a quick dismissive scan of my elegant but understated navy blue dress. It was a dress I loved, one I felt beautiful in, but under her gaze it suddenly felt frumpy. "You should have let me take you shopping," she continued, not waiting for a response. "I could have found you something with a bit more impact." Before I could reply, she turned to a couple I didn't know. "This is my big sister, Sarah. She's the domestic goddess of the family. Her meatloaf is legendary." She said it with a dazzling smile, as if it were the highest compliment, but we both knew the subtext. "You cook," I conqué. Later, I saw her and Mark having a tense, whispered conversation near the bar. I was on my way to the restroom and couldn't help but overhear a few snippets. Mark's face was stormy, his voice a low growl. Another delay on the River North project. The investors are getting nervous. Chloe's response was sharp, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm. You promised me this was handled, Mark. The gala for the hospital wing is in 2 months. I'm the chairwoman. I can't have any unpleasantness. He waved his hand dismissively. It's a cash flow issue, that's all. I'll move some things around. It's handled. He then noticed me hovering nearby, and his expression immediately changed. A slick, salesman's smile replacing the scowl. Sarah, just telling Chloe how incredible this all island. You and David must be so proud. Leo's a great kid. Got his mother's heart and, thankfully, his father's head for numbers, eh? He winked, and the two of them laughed. It was a small, insignificant moment, but it felt chilling. The ease with which they switched their masks, the undercurrent of panic I'd sensed beneath their polished exteriors. It was a crack in the facade. A tiny one, but a crack nonetheless. It was a detail my professional mind, the mind of Athena, filed away without even thinking. At the time, I dismissed it as the usual stress of big business. I had no idea that the cash flow issue he'd mentioned was the tip of an iceberg of deceit so massive it was about to sink their entire fleet. The reception moved into the grand conservatory for dinner, and as the wine flowed and the music played, the celebratory atmosphere was infectious, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the sense that we were all dancing on the edge of a cliff. The dinner was a magnificent affair. The tables were adorned with towering floral arrangements, the food was exquisite, and the speeches were, for the most part, heartwarming. David gave a beautiful, witty tribute to our son, filled with funny anecdotes from his childhood that had the room alternating between laughter and tears. Maya's father gave a speech so full of love and pride for his daughter that it touched everyone. Leo and Maya themselves spoke with such genuine joy and gratitude that the love they shared seemed to radiate through the entire room. It was everything a wedding should be. Then the MC announced, "And now, for a special toast from the groom's aunt, Chloe." Chloe rose from her seat, champagne flute in hand, and glided to the microphone. The spotlight caught the sequins on her dress, making her sparkle as if she were dusted with diamonds. She tapped the microphone, a practiced move, and waited for absolute silence. "For those of you who don't know me," she began, her voice smooth as silk, "I'm Chloe, Sarah's little sister, which makes me the incredibly proud aunt of our handsome groom, Leo." She paused for applause, which came politely. "I've watched Leo grow from a rambunctious little boy into this incredible, accomplished man, and as I look at him and his stunning bride, Maya, I'm just filled with so much admiration." She turned to the happy couple, her smile wide and radiant. "Leo, you have your mother's kindness, your father's intelligence, and a future that looks as bright and promising as any of my downtown real estate developments." The room chuckled. It was classic Chloe self-referential, but still within the bounds of a normal wedding toast. But then, her eyes shifted, moving from Leo and sweeping over the crowd until they landed directly on me. Her smile tightened just a fraction, and a different glint appeared in her eyes. It was the look of a predator zeroing in on its prey. Seeing Leo here today, so successful, so full of potential, it really makes you think about choices, about the different paths we all take in life. The room was still with her, but I could feel David tense beside me. He knew, as I did, that the ground was shifting. "Some of us," she continued, her voice dripping with a syrupy, false sincerity, "are built to conquer the world. We build businesses, we shape skylines, we create legacies." She gestured vaguely towards her husband, Mark, who puffed out his chest. "We take risks, and we reap the rewards. It's a demanding life, a life of pressure and sacrifice, and it's not for everyone." She then turned her body fully towards me, making sure everyone followed her gaze. The spotlight seemed to follow, and suddenly I felt exposed, pinned like a butterfly to a board. "And then there are others," she said, her voice softening into a tone of patronizing pity, "who choose a quieter path, a simpler path, a life dedicated to the home, to carpools and bake sales." My face felt hot. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, trying to decipher the meaning behind her words. Leo was no longer smiling. His expression had hardened. His eyes narrowed at his aunt. "And I want to make a toast to my sister, Sarah," Chloe declared, raising her glass high. The final words came out slowly, each one a carefully aimed dart. "Because she is living proof that you don't have to have a career, a title, or a single professional accomplishment to your name to be here tonight. She shows us all that even a jobless failure can raise a successful son." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound, so heavy. It felt like the sound had been sucked out of the room. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear hearts breaking. My heart. My son's. The words hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Jobless failure. At my son's wedding. In front of everyone we loved. It wasn't a backhanded compliment. It wasn't a subtle dig. It was a public execution. I saw Leo start to rise from his seat, his face a mask of pure fury. I saw David's hand clench into a fist on the tablecloth. I saw the shocked, horrified faces of my friends and Maya's family. And in that moment of deafening silence, something inside me, something that had been dormant for 20 years, finally woke up. The patient, forgiving, quiet Sarah receded, and the cold, calculating mind of Athena took her place. I met my sister's triumphant, smiling gaze across the room, and I did something she never expected. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even flinch. I simply smiled back, a calm, serene little smile, and I raised my own glass in a silent toast. And in that moment, I think she knew. I think she saw the shift in my eyes and realized, with a sudden jolt of terror, that the failure she thought she was mocking was not a victim. She was a judge, and court was now in session. The aftermath of Chloe's toast was a masterclass in damage control, orchestrated by me with a calmness that unnerved everyone, most of all my sister. Before Leo could launch himself across the room, before David could say the words I knew were simmering on his tongue, I put a gentle hand on my son's arm. His muscles were coiled tight with rage. "Not now, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice perfectly even. "This is your night. This is Maya's night. Don't let her ruin it. We'll deal with this later." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and saw not the wounded mother he expected, but a commander giving an order. He hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, sat back down, his jaw tight. I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze and turned to David, giving him a look that said, "I've got this." He subsided, though his glare remained fixed on Chloe like a laser. The band, sensing the catastrophic tension, wisely struck up a lively tune. The moment was broken. The conversation slowly, awkwardly, began to buzz again, but the damage was done. The air was thick with it. Chloe seemed momentarily confused by my lack of a dramatic reaction. She had expected tears, a scene, a confirmation of her power over me. My composure was not part of her script. She returned to her table, looking slightly deflated, like an actress who had delivered her big line to an empty theater. For the rest of the evening, I was the picture of grace. I laughed with the guests. I danced with Leo. I shared a heartfelt conversation with Maya's mother. I moved through the celebration as if nothing had happened. But inside, a tectonic shift had occurred. The part of me that had always made excuses for Chloe, that had prioritized family peace above my own dignity, had died. It had been murdered on the dance floor of my son's wedding, and I had no intention of reviving it. I was operating on pure, cold clarity. Later that evening, after the cake was cut and the bouquet was tossed, Leo pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the garden. The fury had subsided, replaced by a deep, protective hurt. "Mom, I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to say something. I should have taken the mic from her." I smoothed the lapel of his tuxedo, my heart aching with love for him. "Leo, you did exactly the right thing by doing nothing. Your only job tonight was to marry the love of your life and be happy. You did that perfectly. This is not your battle." He shook his head. "But she insulted you. She humiliated you." I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, she did. And she will have to live with the consequences of that. But those consequences will not happen here. Not tonight. This celebration is yours. Don't let her toxic behavior cast a shadow on your happiest memory." He searched my face, looking for cracks in my composure. "Are you okay?" "Really?" For the first time that night, I let a flicker of the real me show through. "I'm not okay," I said honestly. "But I will be. I promise you. Everything is going to be handled." The conviction in my own voice surprised me. It was the voice of Athena, and it was a voice I hadn't realized I'd missed. When David and I finally returned to our quiet hotel room late that night, the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. David wrapped his arms around me as I stood staring out the window at the city lights. "I've never wanted to punch your sister more than I did tonight," he said quietly into my hair. I should have said something. I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his warmth. "No," I said, my voice hard. Saying something would have given her the drama she wanted. Silence is a much more powerful response. It gives you time to think. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. I turned in his arms to face him. The hurt was there in my eyes now, raw and unfiltered. For 20 years, David, I have let her define me. I let her create this narrative where I'm weak and she's strong. I let her do it to keep the peace. But there is no peace. There's just a long, slow surrender. And tonight, I surrendered for the last time. He stroked my cheek. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. "Do you remember a few weeks ago I told you that Ariadne Strategies was hired by the board of Vantage Holdings to do a top-to-bottom strategic review?" Vantage Holdings, Mark's company. David's eyes widened slightly as he understood. "You were hired by Mark's board?" I nodded. "Anonymously. They don't know it's me. They just know Athena. The board is worried, David. The stock is down. Their last 2 major projects are hemorrhaging money. And they suspect Mark is hiding the extent of the problem." I pulled away and started to pace the room. "I've had preliminary access to their financials for 2 weeks. It's bad. It's worse than the board knows. I've seen irregularities, numbers that don't add up. I was planning on advising a gentle course correction, giving Mark the benefit of the doubt for Chloe's sake. I was going to try to help him fix it quietly, to protect the family." I stopped pacing and looked at him, my eyes like chips of ice. "That protection is now officially revoked. Tomorrow morning, I'm not just advising a course correction. I'm launching a full-scale investigation. I'm going to follow the money, and I will pull on every thread until their entire rotten empire unravels." She called me a jobless failure. She has no idea that my job is about to be her undoing. End quote. To understand the scale of what was about to happen, you need to understand what Ariadne Strategies really island. When I started it, it was just me and a laptop in a spare bedroom. But over 15 years, it grew into something else entirely. I am not just a consultant. I am a corporate ghost, a whisper in the boardroom. The person CEOs call when they are facing a problem so complex, so sensitive, that they can't trust anyone inside their own organization to fix it. My specialty is identifying structural rot before a company collapses. I am a surgeon for sick corporations. And because of the nature of my work dealing with fraud, executive malfeasance, and potential scandals, anonymity is my greatest asset. My clients sign ironclad NDAs. I communicate through encrypted channels. I have a small, fiercely loyal team of forensic accountants and data analysts, all of whom work remotely and know me only as Athena. We have no flashy office. Our website is a single, cryptic landing page with a secure contact form. We are a myth in the corporate world, and that's exactly how I designed it. My reputation was built on 3 principles: absolute discretion, brutal honesty, and elegant solutions. I have quietly restructured a failing tech giant, uncovered a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme at a global charity, and mediated a hostile takeover between two warring family dynasties. My fees are astronomical, but my results are undeniable. I have saved companies, but I have also buried executives who thought they were untouchable. I don't play games. I play chess, and I am always 5 moves ahead. So, when the board of Vantage Holdings reached out to Athena 3 months ago, I knew they were in serious trouble. Vantage was Mark's baby. He'd built it from a small, local development firm into a major player in the luxury real estate market. On the surface, they were a massive success story. They had gleaming new condo towers, sprawling suburban developments, and a reputation for high-end, high-profit projects. But for the last 2 years, the whispers in the financial world had started. Whispers about missed deadlines, about contractors not getting paid, about projects that were announced with great fanfare but never seemed to break ground. Their stock price had been slowly bleeding out. The board, a collection of old money investors who had backed Mark early on, were starting to panic. They hired Athena to come in, look at the books, assess the leadership, and give them a clear, unbiased picture of what was going on. They thought they were hiring a stranger. They had no idea they were hiring Mark's sister-in-law, the woman he and his wife dismissed as a suburban housewife. The initial data dive had already raised red flags. Mark's projections were wildly optimistic, based on market conditions that simply didn't exist. Expenses were spiraling out of control. And there were shell corporations. Dozens of them, all linked to Vantage, all moving money around in a way that felt less like clever accounting and more like a deliberate shell game. My preliminary report to the board had been cautious. I'd flagged significant operational inefficiencies and a need for greater transparency in accounting. I had recommended a phased approach to restructuring, one that would allow Mark to save face while we quietly cleaned up the mess behind the scenes. It was a professional courtesy I extended for one reason and one reason only. He was married to my sister. I was trying to protect Chloe from the fallout of her husband's hubris. That protection plan was now in the garbage. That night, after leaving David sleeping in the hotel room, I went to the 24-hour business center. The jobless failure sat down at a computer, logged into my secure servers, and began to work. The gloves were off. I sent a single, encrypted email to my lead forensic accountant, a brilliant but ruthless man named Marcus. The subject line was one word: Vantage. The body of the email was just as brief. Deep dive. Everything. Find it all. No more holding back. Marcus, who knew nothing of my personal connection, replied within minutes. Understood. Sharpening the knives. For the next 4 hours, I didn't stop. I cross-referenced property deeds, analyzed wire transfers, and dug into the labyrinth of LLCs Mark had created. What I started to uncover was staggering. It wasn't just incompetence. It wasn't just bad business. It was a carefully constructed house of cards, built on a foundation of fraudulent loans, inflated asset valuations, and a kickback scheme involving city officials. Mark wasn't just failing. He was a criminal. He was using money from new investors to pay off the old ones, a classic Ponzi scheme, all while siphoning off millions for his and Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. The Range Rover, the trips to Tuscany, the donations in their name, it was all funded by fraud. A cold, hard fury settled in my chest. This was the man whose wife had called me a failure. Her entire life, her entire identity as a successful, powerful woman, was a lie, paid for with stolen money. And she had the audacity to pity me? To mock my honest, simple life? The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. As the sun began to rise over the city, I had what I needed. I had a trail of evidence so clear, so damning, that it would not only destroy Mark, but would obliterate the entire world Chloe had built around herself. I drafted a new report for the Board of Vantage Holdings. This one wasn't gentle. It wasn't phased. It was a corporate kill shot. I scheduled an emergency, board-only meeting for the following Tuesday. The subject: urgent and confidential. Findings of the Athena Strategic Review. Chloe had wanted me to have an impact. Oh, I was about to make an impact, all right. The shockwave was going to be felt all the way from the Vantage boardroom to her marble-floored foyer. The days between the wedding and the board meeting were a strange, surreal limbo. On the surface, life went on. Leo and Maya left for their honeymoon in Hawaii, their faces glowing with happiness, blissfully unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I went back to my quiet suburban house, made meals for David, and answered texts from friends asking if I was all right after the incident. To everyone, I was calm, reassuring. But behind the scenes, I was a general preparing for war. My team at Ariadne Strategies worked around the clock. Marcus and his accountants were like bloodhounds. They uncovered falsified invoices, ghost employees, and a slush fund Mark was using for personal expenses, including the down payment on their Aspen vacation home. We found emails where he explicitly directed his CFO to get creative with the quarterly reports to appease investors. We had him. We had him dead to rights. Chloe, meanwhile, was on a victory tour. Her social media was flooded with photos from the wedding, carefully edited to make her look like the glamorous star of the show. There were photos of her and Mark, captioned, "Power Couple." There was a photo of her with Leo, captioned, "So proud of my amazing nephew." Conspicuously, there were no photos of me. In her version of events, I had been erased. She sent me a single text message 2 days after the wedding. "Hope you're not still upset about my little joke. It was all in good fun. You can be so sensitive sometimes." I read the message, the sheer, unadulterated narcissism of it, and I didn't reply. I simply took a screenshot and saved it to a file on my computer labeled Motivation. On Tuesday morning, I didn't go to a downtown office. The board meeting was a video conference, a concession to the modern world that also perfectly suited my need for anonymity. I sat in my quiet home office, the one Chloe thought I used for scrapbooking, wearing a simple black blazer. I kept my camera off. The board members of Vantage Holdings appeared on my screen one by one, their faces a mixture of anxiety and impatience. They were all powerful men in their 60s and 70s, used to being in control. Mark was not on the call. As per my instructions, this was for board members only. The chairman, a stern-faced man named Arthur Kensington, cleared his throat. "Athena," he said, his voice gravelly. "We're here. The floor is yours. We're all very concerned by the tone of your summons." "Oh, you should be, Arthur," I said, my voice calm and measured. I didn't need to shout. The information was going to do the shouting for me. What I am about to share with you cannot leave this virtual room. I am invoking the emergency clause in my contract, which means my findings must be met with immediate and decisive action. I shared my screen. The first slide was simple. It was an organizational chart of Vantage Holdings and its dozens of subsidiary LLCs. Then, with a click, I began to animate the flow of money. Red arrows snaked across the screen, moving from legitimate construction loans into a web of shell corporations and then into offshore accounts. "For the past 3 years," I began, "Mark has been running not one, but 2 fraudulent operations within Vantage. The first is a classic Ponzi scheme. The funds raised for the new River North Tower were not used for construction. They were used to pay off the angry investors from the failed Lakeshore development, a project he told you was merely delayed." I could see the color drain from Arthur's face. "The second," I continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed copies of wire transfers, "is a straightforward embezzlement and kickback scheme. He has overbilled the company for materials through a shell supplier that he secretly owns, pocketing millions. He has also been paying kickbacks to a city inspector to sign off on non-existent progress reports. For the next hour, I laid it all out. Every fake invoice, every illegal transfer, every incriminating email. I presented them with a case so thorough, so irrefutable, that a first-year law student could have won it. The silence on the other end of the call was deafening. These were men who prided themselves on their business acumen, and I had just shown them that they had been played for fools by a charismatic fraudster. "So, What you're telling us, Arthur finally said, his voice a choked whisper, is that the company is insolvent? I shook my head. No, the company is a crime scene, but it is not insolvent. Yet, the underlying assets, the properties, are still valuable, but the leadership is rotten to the core. I put up my final slide. It had 2 columns, Path A and Path B. You have 2 choices, I told them. Path A, you do nothing. The Ponzi scheme collapses within the next 60 days. The SEC freezes your assets, the company goes into receivership, and every single one of you will be named in the ensuing lawsuits and federal investigation. You will lose everything. I let that sink in. Or, Path B, you take immediate control. You terminate Mark for cause, effective immediately. You hire an independent crisis management team, my team, to take over operations. You self-report to the SEC and cooperate fully with their investigation. You will take a massive financial hit, but you will salvage the underlying assets, and you may, just may, avoid personal prosecution. The choice was obvious. It was a choice between total annihilation and a painful, but survivable, amputation. Arthur looked like he was going to be sick. We need to vote, he stammered. The vote was unanimous. It took less than a minute. Athena, Arthur said, his voice shaking. We are officially engaging you for crisis management. What's the first step? I took a breath. This was the moment. The first step, I said, is that 2 of you, Arthur, will drive to Mark's office right now. You will inform him he is terminated and that he is not to touch his computer. You will have security escort him from the building. He is not to be allowed back in. The rest of you will work with my legal team to draft the initial SEC disclosure. You have 1 hour to get this in motion. My team is standing by. The call ended. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. The silence of my office, a stark contrast to the explosion I had just detonated in a downtown skyscraper. Karma, I thought, isn't some mystical force. Sometimes it's just a well-prepared woman with a laptop and a grudge. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Just as I had instructed, Arthur and another board member went directly to the Vantage Holdings headquarters. From what Arthur told me later, the scene was cinematic. Mark was in his glass-walled corner office, laughing on the phone with a real estate broker when they walked in and shut the door. 10 minutes later, he was being escorted out by building security, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The company-wide email, announcing his immediate termination for financial misconduct, went out an hour after that. The shockwaves hit the Chicago business community like an earthquake. The story was the lead item on the local news that night. Real estate mogul Mark ousted amid fraud allegations. They used a picture of him and Chloe at a recent charity gala, smiling for the cameras, the perfect power couple. Chloe's reaction, when the news broke, was precisely what I expected. Her first call wasn't to her husband, it was to me. I was in my kitchen, calmly making a pot of tea, when my phone rang. I saw her name and let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a frantic, hysterical tirade. Sarah! What is going on? The news is saying Mark was fired. It's a lie, right? Some kind of mistake? People are calling me. This is a nightmare. Call me back right now. You have to do something. I listened to the message, took a serene sip of my tea, and deleted it. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. This is your fault, isn't it? Mark said his board hired some shark of a consultant. You know these people. You were a lawyer. You have to fix this. The lack of self-awareness was breathtaking. Even in her moment of crisis, she saw me as a tool, a resource to be deployed for her benefit. I texted back a single simple sentence. I'm so sorry to hear you're going through a difficult time, Chloe. Oh, over the next 48 hours, her world imploded with brutal efficiency. The SEC officially announced their investigation. A judge, citing flight risk and the scale of the fraud, froze all of Mark's personal and corporate assets. The platinum credit cards were declined. The bank accounts were locked. The slick lawyers they had on retainer suddenly wanted a massive upfront payment to even consider taking the case, money they no longer had access to. The news stories got worse. Details of the Ponzi scheme and the kickbacks started to leak. The city inspector Mark had been bribing was arrested. The word disgrace was now permanently attached to their name. Her so-called friends, the society swans she preened with at galas, vanished. Her calls went unanswered. The invitations to upcoming events were quietly rescinded. The social pedestal she had spent 2 decades building had crumbled to dust overnight. One of my guilty pleasures during this time was watching her social media. Her Instagram, once a testament to a life of effortless luxury, became a digital ghost town. The last post was a smiling photo from Leo's wedding. The comments section, however, was a war zone. It started with confused questions from her followers, then morphed into a torrent of angry, hateful messages from investors who had lost their life savings, from contractors who had been ruined, from people who felt cheated by the facade she and Mark had presented. Someone found the news article about Mark's firing and posted the link. After that, the floodgates opened. Scammer. Thief. You and your husband belong in jail. Hope you enjoy your new life in a studio apartment. Chloe, who had lived for public adoration, was now being publicly crucified. After a day of this, her account was deactivated. She had vanished from the world she had so desperately tried to dominate. A week after the board meeting, I received a call from Leo. He and Maya were back from their honeymoon. His voice was heavy. "Mom, I saw the news about Uncle Mark. Is it true?" "I'm afraid it is, honey," I said gently. There was a long pause. Did you have anything to do with this?" he asked, his voice hesitant, almost afraid of the answer. It was a fair question. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I had promised my son that I would never lie to him. "Yes," I said quietly. My firm was hired by his board to do a review. I uncovered what he was doing, and I reported it. It was my professional obligation. I didn't need to tell him about Chloe's toast. He was smart enough to connect the dots. He knew that my professional obligation had been a dormant volcano until his aunt decided to dance on its crater. "Okay," he said after another long silence. "Okay, Mom. Thank you for telling me." There was no judgment in his voice, only a sad, weary understanding. He knew the years of history. He had seen the 1,000 small cuts. He understood that this wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. It was the bill for 2 decades of arrogance finally coming due. 2 weeks after her world had been reduced to rubble, Chloe showed up at my front door. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and the sight of her standing on my modest porch was jarring. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater that looked out of place on her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't wearing makeup. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The armor of wealth and arrogance had been stripped away, and what was left was a woman I barely recognized. She looked lost, and small, and defeated. She didn't even ring the bell, just stood there in the drizzle until I opened the door. "They took the house, Sarah," she said, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "The bank took it. We have until the end of the month to get out." I didn't say anything, just held the door open for her. She walked into my foyer, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, and looked around my home as if seeing it for the first time. She ran a hand over the worn, comfortable armchair in the living room, her eyes lingering on the framed family photos that lined the mantelpiece, photos of Leo's soccer games, of family vacations to national parks, of Christmases spent in our cozy living room, not in some 5-star resort. "It's so quiet here," she murmured. "Yes," I said. "It island." She finally turned to face me, and the dam of her composure broke. "How could you do this to me?" she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "To us, we're family. Mark is going to prison. I have nothing. Nothing. The cars are gone. The accounts are frozen. I had to sell my jewelry just to buy groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is? She was looking for a fight, for a villain to blame, for the familiar dynamic where she was the center of the drama. I refused to give it to her. Sit down, Chloe, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I led her to the kitchen table and made her a cup of tea, the same way I had for Leo whenever he came home with a scraped knee or a bruised heart. She sat there, hunched over, her sobs slowly subsiding into ragged breaths. This isn't about you, Chloe, I said, sitting across from her. This is about the families who lost their life savings because of Mark's greed. It's about the small business owners he bankrupted. It's about the laws he broke. She shook her head, defiant even in her ruin. But you could have stopped it. You could have warned us. You could have helped him fix it quietly. I was going to, I said softly. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion. What are you talking about? This was the moment, the final piece of the puzzle. The truth I had been holding back. Vantage Holdings hired my firm 3 months ago, Chloe. They hired Athena to find out what was wrong with the company. She stared at me, her mind clearly unable to process what I was saying. Your firm? What are you talking about? You don't have a firm, you're... Her voice trailed off as the horrifying, impossible truth began to dawn on her. A jobless failure? I finished for her, my voice devoid of any emotion. That's what you called me, isn't it? At my son's wedding. The color drained completely from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. No, she whispered. It can't be. Athena, they say she's the best. They say she's ruthless. I am the best, I said simply. And I am ruthless when I need to be. For 2 months, Chloe, I was advising Mark's board on a gentle path forward. I was giving your husband a chance to fix the mess he made, a chance he didn't deserve, because he was family. I was protecting you. And then you stood up at my son's wedding, in front of everyone I love, and you gutted me. You took 20 years of my choices, my sacrifices, and my happiness, and you spat on them. You did it for sport, just to feel powerful for a moment. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. And in that moment, you made me realize that you are not family. You are a liability. So, I revoked my protection. I took the leash off my team, and I told them to find everything. And they did. What happened to Mark, to your house, to your money? That is not my fault. That is the consequence of his actions. But the timing of it? The fact that it all came crashing down last week instead of 6 months from now? That, Chloe, is the direct result of the words you chose to say at that wedding. You didn't just insult a housewife. You insulted the one person who was holding the thread that kept your entire world from unraveling, and you forced me to let go. She just sat there, utterly silent, the teacup trembling in her hands. The full weight of her actions, the spectacular cosmic irony of it all, had finally landed. She had been destroyed not by a faceless corporate shark, but by the sister she had spent a lifetime looking down on. A year has passed since that rainy, transformative afternoon in my kitchen. A full circle of seasons has turned, each one carrying its own subtle melody of change and healing. The autumn that followed our confrontation was a time of quiet demolition, of old structures being torn down to their foundations. Winter was a period of deep, frozen silence, a necessary fallow ground for the scorched earth between my sister and me to rest and recover. With the spring came the first tentative signs of new life, fragile shoots of understanding pushing their way through the hardened soil. And now, in the warmth of summer, a new landscape has taken shape, one that is irrevocably altered, yet holds the promise of a more authentic future. The life we all knew is gone forever, replaced by something quieter, something more honest, and infinitely more real. The aftershocks of the earthquake I triggered have long since settled, and the new reality has become permanent. Mark's fall from grace was as swift as it was absolute. His trial was a brief, humiliating affair. a footnote in the city's business pages. The evidence my team compiled was so overwhelming that his high-priced lawyers could do little more than negotiate the terms of his surrender. He was sentenced to 10 years in a federal minimum security prison for a litany of crimes including wire, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was forced to liquidate every remaining asset, a pathetic fraction of what he owed his victims. The name, Mark, once a symbol of aggressive success, became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties, a ghost of the city skyline he once claimed to shape. He is no longer a character in our lives, merely a chapter in a book we have all closed. The Vantage Holdings Group, however, did not die. Under the steady, expert guidance of my team at Ariadne, it was surgically dissected, cleansed of its corruption, and painstakingly rebuilt. It was a Herculean task, involving long nights, brutal negotiations, and the difficult but necessary termination of those who had been complicit in Mark's schemes. I made the decision to step out from behind the curtain of Athena and manage the final stages of the transition myself. Walking into that gleaming office tower for the first time as Sarah Wells, seeing the fear and uncertainty in the employees' eyes, was one of the most challenging moments of my career. But slowly, meeting by meeting, decision by decision, we earned their trust. We saved the company, and more importantly, we saved the jobs of hundreds of employees who had done nothing wrong. The company is now solvent, stable, and on a long, slow path to making its investors whole. Its new foundation is built not on charisma and lies, but on transparency and integrity. On the home front, the joy has been pure and uncomplicated. My son Leo and his wonderful wife Maya are a constant source of light. Their first year of marriage has been a beautiful thing to witness, a partnership built on mutual respect and a deep, abiding love. And now, they have given us the most incredible gift. They are expecting their first child, my first grandchild, in the spring. The news has sent a wave of fresh, hopeful energy through our family. The thought of becoming a grandmother fills me with a kind of profound, peaceful happiness that eclipses any professional achievement. It feels like the ultimate promotion, the true corner office. Leo and I have spoken at length about that terrible night at his wedding. He sees everything with a clarity and wisdom that belies his years. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he told me one recent afternoon as we sat on my back porch. "Not for what you did to them, but for what you did for yourself. You finally showed them who you are." His understanding, his unwavering support, is perhaps the greatest validation of the life I chose to build. And Chloe? Her journey has been the most complex, the most painful, and ultimately, the most transformative. Her fall was not just financial, it was existential. She lost not just her house and her status, but her very identity. The woman who had defined herself by her possessions, her social standing, and her husband's power was suddenly left with none of it. I know from my mother that the first few months were brutal. She was forced to sell every last vestige of her former life, the designer clothes, the art, the jewelry piece by painful piece. Each sale was another small death. She moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she once would have driven through with her doors locked. And for the first time in her adult life, she had to find a job. Not a glamorous career, but a job that paid the bills. She now works as an administrative assistant at the bursar's office of a local community college. She takes the bus to work. She buys her groceries at Aldi. She has learned the difference between a want and a need. It has been a brutal, humbling, and necessary education in the realities of the world she had always viewed from a soundproof luxury vehicle. For the first 6 months after that rainy afternoon in my kitchen, we didn't speak. The silence was absolute. It wasn't an angry silence, but a necessary one. A space for the raw wounds to scab over. I knew she needed to navigate the wreckage on her own terms, without my presence looming over her as a constant reminder of her failure. Then, one day in early spring, a simple cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I recognized her elegant, looping handwriting immediately. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a simple, unadorned card. There were no excuses, no justifications, no deflections, just 7 words, written in a hand that looked shakier, less certain than I remembered. You were right. I'm sorry. For everything. Those 7 words were the beginning of a new chapter. Our relationship today is not what it once was. The easy, thoughtless, and often toxic bond of sisterhood we shared is gone forever, and perhaps that's for the best. What is growing in its place is something new, something fragile, but something infinitely more honest. We started with coffee, once a month, at a neutral cafe halfway between our 2 very different worlds. The first few meetings were painfully awkward, filled with long silences and stilted small talk. We didn't talk about Mark, or the company, or the wedding. Instead, she told me about her difficult boss, about a funny thing that happened on the bus. She asked about Leo and Maya, about David's work. She asked about my life, and for the first time, she actually listened to the answer, her eyes holding mine, a deep, weary sadness in them that had replaced the old condescension. During our 3rd meeting, she insisted on paying for her own coffee, a small but monumental gesture. I need to do this, she said simply, and I understood. Last month, we had a breakthrough. She started talking about her jealousy, about how my quiet contentment had always felt like a judgment on her own frantic, hollow pursuit of more. You seemed so happy with so little, she confessed, staring into her cup. And I had so much, and I was miserable. It made me angry. I think I punished you for it. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation, a glimpse into the insecure heart of the bully she had been. She is not the sister I grew up with, but she is, perhaps, becoming a person I can finally learn to know and, in time, to love again. As for me, the integration of my 2 worlds became inevitable. The success and scale of the Vantage turnaround was too public, and the mystery of Athena became a story the financial press was determined to solve. A major business magazine eventually connected the dots and did a feature story on me. They called it The Quiet Architect, and the narrative of the stay-at-home mom who built a multi-million-dollar consulting empire from her spare bedroom resonated with people in a way I never could have anticipated. The sudden spotlight was uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. I no longer had to hide. My life is fuller now, more public, but it hasn't changed in the ways that truly matter. I still live in the same house. I still drive my old Volvo. David and I still find our greatest joy in quiet evenings at home and long walks in the woods. The difference is that I no longer feel the need to compartmentalize my identity. I am Sarah, the mother, the wife, and soon, the grandmother. And I am Athena, the strategist and the CEO. I have finally, fully learned that I don't have to choose. A woman's worth is not a single, static thing to be measured by a job title or a tax bracket. It is a vast and complex mosaic, made up of all her choices, all her loves, and all her ambitions, both the quiet and the loud. The greatest lesson I learned through this entire, painful ordeal was not about revenge. Watching Chloe's world burn did not bring me joy. It was a tragedy born of arrogance and insecurity, a tragedy that could have been avoided. The real victory was not in her defeat, but in my own liberation. It was the moment I stopped allowing someone else's narrow, materialistic definition of success to diminish the value of my own life. The moment I stood up and reclaimed my own story. My value was never tied to my professional accomplishments, as impressive as they may have been. It was in the love I gave, the family I nurtured, and the quiet integrity with which I lived my life. The fact that I also happened to build a corporate empire in my spare time was just a wonderful, validating bonus. My sister's cruel words at my son's wedding were meant to be a final judgment, a gravestone marking the death of my ambition. But instead, they became a key, unlocking a part of myself I had kept hidden for too long, even from myself. She called me a jobless failure, and in doing so, she inadvertently handed me the ultimate power. The power to stand in my own truth, and finally, to define for the entire world what success truly means. If you have ever had to redefine your own worth in the face of someone else's judgment, or have found strength in the quiet corners of your own life, please share your experience in the comments below. These stories of resilience, of quiet power, are what connect us all. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like and subscribe button, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that the most powerful lives are often not the loudest ones. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always, always have the courage to write your own definition of a successful life.